It's my pleasure to introduce the next session, Making Life Yours and Making Life Accessible. So our speakers are Dr. Hana Alazem, Stephanie Suchsdorf-Lawrence, and Dr. Anna McCormick. Dr. Hana Alazem is the assistant professor at the University of Ottawa in the Department of Pediatrics, and she specializes clinically as a rehabilitation medicine specialist, both at CHEO and the Ottawa Rehabilitation Centre. And Dr. Anna McCormick is the medical director of pediatric rehabilitation at CHEO and a rehab consultant at the Ottawa Children's Treatment Center and the Rehab Center at the Ottawa Hospital. So if I could get Dr. Alazem and Dr. McCormick to come to the front, that would be great. And Stephanie Suchsdorf-Lawrence is an occupational therapist and the clinical educator for motion. And we also have Allison Green, and Allison is an occupational therapist at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. As our moderator for this session, she'll be working with the panelists and the speakers. And we also have family panelists, Darlene Morden and Maureen Cheeseman. So we'll get all of the panelists to come up to the front. And we'll have Dr. McCormick open the session.
Hi, my name is Dr. Anna McCormick. I'm a pediatrician and a rehabilitation specialist, and I've had the honor to work at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario now for 25 years and counting. I've also been in our neuromuscular clinic for 25 years. Things have changed. True story, Dr. Hugh McMillan, he's left the room, not good, but he was a resident with me. So I knew then he was going to go on to great things, and he has. And I'm very, very thankful for the subspecialists in this room. They are truly changing the face of what muscular dystrophy, what the families, I think, are experiencing and really pushing things forward. And this is a time of great hope. I've seen a lot when I started in the neuromuscular clinic. And I must say, thanks to the families, thanks to the specialists all working together, because we're in this together, I think this is a time of great hope. So that's the way I'm going to start. You may not see me in the little brochure, and I'll explain that. Dr. Alazem, who's doing our transition clinic, who was a fellow with me, invited me to come because she thought she was talking about transition. And in fact, our talk morphed into life transitions, and I tend to see the younger children, and Dr. Alazem tends to see the teens in our clinic. That's the way we're structured. So I was invited, and of course I was thrilled to come. So it's about making life yours, making life accessible. And those of you who haven't worked with a rehab doc before, our specialization really is on, it's broader. It's about, first of all, it's about working with the team, the OT, the PT, the dietitian, all of those, the social worker. And it's about function. It's about activity. It's about participation. It's not necessarily about, the dosing of the steroids or the growth hormone or that. It's much broader than that. And so that's the face that we would like to bring to this presentation. Then, I get in control. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about how it looks in Ottawa. We know that other centers are very different in how they look. But in Ottawa, really, we have a large team. It is the largest multidisciplinary team with, I believe, or it has been at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. We have 2 physical medicine and rehab docs. We have neurology, we have respirology, and the therapist, PT, OT, social work. And I'm going to, once you start doing that, you're going to leave someone out. So I hope I haven't left anybody out, the neurologist, all of us working together. And then we have people who aren't necessarily within the clinic that we liaise with, the cardiologists, the endocrinologists. So it is a big team. And we start to see the children when they're diagnosed. So we hope to see them soon after diagnosis and then follow them along until they're 18 and then transition to adult care. So really, we are very interprofessional, multidisciplinary. We have multiple people. And then by about 13, we have a transition clinic. And transition is not a transfer. Transition is a process. It's about getting through those teenage years. It's about all the teenage goals. And it's about preparing for when you're 18 and when you're moving into the adult medical world. But I always say it's a 3-pillar experience. It's a medical transition, which for some people is quite scary because you've been in a pediatric hospital for a long time. And for us, all the subspecialties are mostly under one roof. And then it's a transition from school. So you're not only going from a pediatric hospital, you're often changing schools. And that can happen at 18, but can happen later. Dr. Alazem is going to talk to you about that as well. But you may also be transitioning out of your home. You may be living in a different place. So all of those together make transition time a particularly different time in one's life. So Dr. Alazem is going to talk more about that, but we have a transition, I would say, a focus on transition within our hospital and someone who particularly focuses on that. And then it's the transfer. In 17 to 18, we write a transition consultation to the Ottawa Rehabilitation Center where they have a clinic. And when I guess it was about 2015, Dr. Alazem did a study on this and looked at it more specifically. And we did a trial of the transition, of having the transition clinic and having an OT and a doc who not only see them on the pediatric side, but see them on the adult side. So there's someone friendly, a friendly face, and someone who knows your medical history that also sees you on the adult side in the Ottawa Rehabilitation Center. And that's the model we have taken on. And then when you're about 22, you move on from there. So I'd like to, I guess, put it out there that that's a model that can be considered and that we've trialed in Ottawa. And then we have some adult rehab doctors that will see individuals after 22. That's Dr. DeJogi and Dr. Anton in our setting. So pediatricians can only see individuals till they're about 22. And that's what Dr. Alazem's done. And then she has colleagues that she refers on to. So those are some of the ideas of the ebbs and flows with respect to care and with respect to life, I guess, when you look over a lifespan. So we're going to talk about initially when I get to see individuals who have received a diagnosis. And usually those little ones are about 4 or 5. And they come in and they're a ball of energy and they're going all over the place. And it's a joy to meet the family and the child. And they're on the start of a journey, and everyone has a little bit different experience on that journey and a little bit different knowledge base. So we try to talk about that. Usually they're doing pretty well with respect to mobility. What I do notice is that the long distance mobility is sometimes an issue. And what they tell me is sometimes they're using a wagon or a stroller if the child is small enough. And it's that's an issue, and endurance. And we start talking about energy conservation. Now, energy conservation sounds fancy, but I always say it's like having money or money in the bank. You want to choose where you spend it. So first of all, you got to know what you have to get done in the day and make sure that you spend the energy in that area, what you absolutely have to get done. And second thing, what gives you joy? So make sure you have enough energy to do the things that give you joy, because we're about hashtag best life. You know, you want to live your best life. And all of us have to make those decisions. So be a little mindful about that. All of us should be mindful about that. Where are we spending our energy? And in some of these school-aged children, they're spending it climbing up the stairs, and, you know, stairs are hard. And well, you know what? We should have an elevator, or maybe we should be on the main floor, and not spend that. Or they have a 20-pound knapsack and they're spending their energy carrying a 20-pound knapsack. Well, we don't want to spend the energy there. We want to spend the energy learning. We want to spend the energy having fun with our friends. We want to spend it at home with our family, having dinner. So really, we need to think about distance, mobility, and endurance at that time. And some people have already talked about the fact that sometimes you get lower leg pain when you're doing the distance mobility, or that the heel cords get a bit tight and the lower extremity gets a little bit tight. And I tend to walk around. I'm not very good at standing. So if you don't hear me, tell me. But are we good? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll stay by my microphone and I'll try to behave. So usually why people at this stage are experiencing some discomfort, or maybe experiencing some discomfort, is because there's a weakness around the hips. People tend to move forward and lean forward, because it's difficult to stand up tall. So it's difficult to, okay, you still got me? Okay, so it's difficult to stand up tall. So then they lean backwards and they end up having what we call a lumbar lordosis. And that can give you discomfort. So watch out for when they're getting tired and you see more of that, because that can be uncomfortable. The other thing that tends to happen is that kids are smart and they figure this out. So when they get tired in their quads, they tend to stand up on their toes, and standing up on their toes puts what we call an extension moment. You don't need to remember that, but they straighten their knee and stand up on their toes so they don't fall. So those postures are what we call compensatory mechanisms, or and really they help them stand up. But it can be hard to do that because it's not the usual way we walk, and it's fatiguing. So again, look at what you're doing, look at what's most important, and look at ways we can do this without causing pain. Because one thing we know about pain is that it decreases quality of life. We know a lot of things that people have thought about that might decrease quality of life, but pain has, study after study proves to us that that's what we want to avoid. So some things that we can do, we don't want to stop them necessarily for walking on toes. We don't want to stop people from walking because it helps them walk. But we want to maintain that range of motion. So we do stretches. And why do we want to maintain that range of motion? I always tell individuals that seek an opinion is that we want to stretch out those heel cords, because it's hard to find shoes sometimes if your heel cords are too tight. And the other thing that we want to do is make sure that we can really put your foot on, let's say, a foot plate of a chair, and that we're not getting a foot that turns in and down. And then when you're getting in your chair, your legs are wide and we can't fit through doors. And down the road, that can be really more of a problem than you see initially. So that stretching and that wearing of a little brace, what we call a stretching brace or an ankle foot orthosis, either at night or sometimes during the day, can be very helpful in maintaining that foot position over the longer term. And one thing that people do ask me is about wearing those braces at night. and that they're uncomfortable and they wake up at night and they don't like them, I say never give up a night's sleep. Okay, some people can sleep through the night no matter what you do. Some people not so much. So you know, you have to tailor it to everyone. So do a little bit of stretching, maybe when in the evening when they're gaming or when they're, you know, watching TV, it's okay with the braces, and make the braces fun and characters. Let them pick the picture, the whatever they want on their braces. Just, you know, sometimes it is useful to stick with it if you can. The recommendations again, energy conservation, energy conservation, energy conservation. I've said that enough. Equipment at that point, usually the braces are something that we talk about, and really getting to know your team. And I can't say this enough. Try to understand who's doing what and who we call when. You know, usually there's a initial person who's your contact point, and they can help you navigate. But as you go through the journey, I think really understanding that OT is a specialist in equipment, PT in the exercise, social work, you know, helping to help us understand what the emotional impact is or what the services are. So each of them has a role. Take home message, get to know your team. And again, those energy limitations, and maybe think about the bracing and stretching. As mobility gets a little bit more difficult, I think it's really important that we start looking at the equipment and starting knowing what the equipment is and how it can help you. And at this stage, I often say, yeah, I could walk to work, but you know what? I'd never get there, or I'd be really tired and wet, and my car is my equipment to get to work. A chair may be someone's equipment to go long distance, and it's just equipment. And really trying to help unpack some of the societal ideas about equipment, I think is a really important thing as we think over the lifespan. So there may be tripping and lower endurance, getting really tired. You know, you try to maintain walking, but you're getting tired and you're tripping, and then the safety worries start to sneak in there. So how can we keep doing the stuff we love and not put ourselves at risk and still try to get exercise? These are some of the things we think. And I love the swimming. Whoever started talking about the swimming is great. For many of our families, access to swimming can be an issue. And we got to really advocate for more access to swimming, I think. Yeah, that's right. You know, spread the word. The manual, and this is an issue. So sometimes this distant mobility becomes an issue. Well, what do we do? And Allison, where's Allison? Whoop. Allison will tell you that you studied you know, should we use a manual chair or should we go right to a power chair? That's often a question. Who has thought about that and had issues of thinking manual chair? Well, yeah, I think it's a common issue. What sometimes is helpful, I think, is when that long distance mobility starts to be an issue, is looking at either a rental of a manual or putting it in your car, just having it there and using it when you want to. It kind of makes you used to that the feeling of having one and the acceptance and those things, because it can be a very emotional issue. But sometimes a manual in your back of your car can be helpful. Or people have told me that it can be helpful. And then you start understanding the equipment, because there's such a breadth of it. You know, do I need it to make it safe for me getting out of bed? Do I need it in the bathroom? Do I need it at school? What's out there? And really have a discussion with your OT. Know your options before we have a fall or a problem. So I think that's a really important stage. And then the social supports, I think, are really important. Oh, I'm only on here. Okay, are really important. I think as we around 7 to 8 years of age, there's a real stage of, and it could happen earlier, everyone's on a different journey, but they see them, they start understanding some of the differences, and they see the differences, and that's a journey. And making sure we build that sense of self and identity. We heard at some of our academy meetings, international academy meetings this year, about that different journey from people with lived experience, that different journey of developing that sense of self and really building that up between 7 and 9 years of age. I think is really important because, you know, it's okay to use a wheelchair. I'm me, and this is who I am. And I'm okay if I use a wheelchair, or if I have braces or whatever. And you know what? We need to work as a world together in saying it's okay. Diversity is amazing. Let's celebrate it. It's okay. If I go here and you go there, you're in a chair and I walk, that's okay. But the acceptance of the equipment, huge, huge step for many families. And then, so the take-home message is, again, invest the time in self-identity, in the work on self, in being happy with self, in what I want to do, how I want to be active, and how I want to participate. And then know your options for the equipment. You know, start getting comfy with it. And really, it's about best life. It's about having the equipment that you need to stay healthy as a care provider, as well as a person living with a certain condition. And that's my message.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy and grateful when we were asked to come talk about transitions and making life accessible. I just couldn't do it without my my partner in crime and my mentor. So I'm happy you all got to hear from her. So it's great. Okay, so I'm Dr. Alazem, as we've already introduced me, and I'm going to talk about the next few transitions in life. So let's go on here. All right. So now this next transition, and we were very careful not to necessarily put numbers and ages, because this is a journey, a different journey for everybody. Okay. So this is at the point where you may be in the primary wheelchair use stage, whether that be a manual chair or a power chair, depending on some of the factors we already spoke about. So maybe your discussions with the OT, funding concerns, what you have access to. Okay. And I think we've belabored this home, but there is a concept of acceptance and commitment, really starting to, get to the point where we've thought about what equipment we might want to use in the future, but now we actually do have to accept it and commit to, this is my next stage of identity. This is what I'm going to use to be able to participate and have maximal opportunities. So it is also stages. We're not just talking about wheelchairs and braces. There's lots of other equipment, okay? We're starting to talk about equipment in the bathroom, maybe some grab bars, maybe assisted bath chairs, maybe some more equipment at school. Also home access, right? Ramps, mechanical lifts, so that, because many of you parents here are very strong and have kept up your physical abilities, but we worry about your back. Right? I had a little chuckle over there. Right? We do. We really do worry about caregivers' health, because what happens if you're hurt? Okay. And so we really do sit down with our patients at this stage and really ask, like, what are some of your participation goals? What are some things that you want to do? So the picture there in the corner is one of our patients who plays power hockey. Or hockey. And so this individual wanted a zippy power chair fast, right? So that's what we got for this individual, as fast as possible. We talked about home and school, some other equipment, helping with dressing, zippers, buttons, these types of things can get hard, or sometimes cutting food. I didn't know until I sat down with Allison how easy it is to get a rocker knife, which is actually way more ergonomical than the traditional knife that we use. You can get on Amazon for like $10, and a cutting board with suction, and a sock assistance, all these things that I didn't know until I spent some time with our OT. And so it's really important that we start investing in knowing what our options are. Also some writing communication tools. Now it's 2023. Everyone uses Siri or your smartwatch. And so I think it's also really important that we start using this technology for our vocational and educational goals. And exploring funding options. And I think Stephanie from Motion's going to give us some wise words of wisdom, really knowing what you have, because you might want that extra chair in your car or the travel chair that has an electrical capability that's a little bit less cumbersome than the big power zippy chair, right? So really the take home in this stage is focusing on accepting the equipment and to maximize participation and quality of life. Okay, and then the transition to young adulthood, which is very dear to my heart. As you heard, we have this unique model in Ottawa where folks get to meet me on the pediatric side, but I also have asked permission from the Ontario government to continue to be able to care for these patients at least till 22, and patients and families, I should say. And that might not be the case, I know, everywhere, but we do welcome that, we know, asking and seeing what the options and what transition phases are, or what the transition options are in your city, in your town, is really important to know early on. And so this is often a time where my patients are perhaps now using their power wheelchairs. They're more comfortable in their identity, but then other transitions and things start to happen. Like there's lots of change. We talked a little bit about pubertal changes, but there's also less physical change and more change of the team, the support system, right? You start to lose the Dr. McMillans, the Leanne Wards, the Dr. Katzes that you see in the room. You're starting to lose some of your team members. And we are transitioning as best as possible to adult members. But sometimes the way that the adult world is set up, we're not seeing you as often. And so that's really important to start to introduce that concept of who's going to be the people that are going to catch you on the other end from a medical perspective, but then also from every other perspective. So from the school perspective, vocational perspective, what are your options for education after, right? We sit down and talk about meeting with the local colleges, university, day programs, knowing what your options are in your area, knowing what schools or university or college campuses have accessibility centers that can help you through your processes and kind of make your decision of where you might want to go to achieve those challenges. So not just medical transition, but also school and vocational. And then the home piece. So there may be more requirements to change your home, especially if you may be moving, maybe going into residence, moving cities, and financial support. Here in Ontario, we talk early on about ODSP and other services very early, so that you are applying for these things on time, so that you have the options to have your resources nice and early. So the recommendations here is we start early. We start talking about this as early as 13 years of age. And most parents look at me with, like I have two heads. Why are you talking about transition? My kid is only 13. And as you all know, that goes really fast. 13 to 18 goes really fast. And I don't necessarily transfer the care right at 17 or 18. We do it when we're ready, okay, when everything is in place. But the earlier we do it, the better, because then I can start introducing you to my adult colleagues. And I like to have, medical and information over on the adult side as well. So that's important. I also think it's really important that you do have a medical quarterback. So whether that be your it's not your pediatrician anymore, right? So you have to make sure that you can have a family doctor. For most folks that are here in Ontario, it's hard to find a family doctor. I think it's a problem everywhere in Canada. But you can have a pediatrician and a family doctor. So remember that. And that might be important because guess what? When you're 18, you do lose that pediatrician. So it's great that you've had a family doc who's kind of known your medical care and known your family the whole time. And then they can catch you on the other end as a quarterback. They might not know everything about Duchenne, but it's nice to have someone that's there that we can communicate with, that we can work together with. And then, like I said, make sure we apply and learn about the financial services early. Transition checklists. There's a lot out there online. Make sure you ask your kind of local neuromuscular clinic if they have access to one, because it does go through all the stuff we talked about today. So all the docs that are going to be seeing you on the other side, all the therapists, all the financial pieces, all the vocational opportunities, and that's really important. And really transfer when ready. So that's a hard one, because not everyone is always emotionally ready to do it, but transfer when we go through this checklist and we do have everything in place. So it's never too early to talk about transitions, and that's really the take home there. Okay, now we're very lucky to have another lovely lady with lots of experience. I want to say, I think you said even 30 years of experience with equipment, and some examples of which equipments do we actually use throughout these transitions.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Lawrence. I'm an occupational therapist. And while I've been an occupational therapist for, 35 years, I actually have been working with boys, or I should say young people with Duchenne's for the last 43 years. I started as a teenager at Easter Seals Camp. And when I looked at the first session, that it was what I wish I would have known then what I know, or I wish I would know now what I know then. And when we asked about talking about equipment, I work for a company called Motion. I'm an education manager, or a clinical educator for all of Canada. But I also do custom seating, which is very close to my heart. Over the course of my lifespan as an OT, I worked at Bloorview Children's Hospital for 16 years and was the primary person for most equipment there. Worked with young people when they were very first ventilated, mounting ventilators on wheelchairs. When we talk about changes that we've seen with this population, it's heart-stopping for me. So that whole idea of equipment and how it can empower people really is very close to my heart. The first, when we originally chatted about, sort of how we were going to manage this session or how we were going to organize it, I really love the 4 kind of areas or 4 definitions of where we're providing intervention, or because it's not age-based anymore. The young people that I knew, that whole age range has shifted entirely. Do we know where we're going to be in 10 years? We don't actually, because medical science has changed so much. So my words of wisdom as an OT, or as somebody who works with equipment predominantly, and I will tell you that a lot of the families that I work with, I was known as the equipment geek. I used to have much shorter hair. I was the lady with the short hair. For the kids that were nonverbal, I was the wrench on their word board. So the whole idea of trying to look at transitions or equipment, or what are the things that we should know about equipment, regardless of where you're at. So when we're starting to look at kids that are still working or still able to ambulate long distance, and equipment is kind of a little bit out there still. What are the things that we should be thinking about? Well, number 1, kids are kids first, and that is regardless of disability. It's funny when the young people, there's one young man who actually is still alive from that era. We're questioning whether he had Duchenne's or Becker's, although they swear he has Duchenne's, but I can't believe he's still alive at 50. He actually had some words of wisdom for me as well. When I asked, and a number of young men that I work with, it's like, how are you so normal? And the comment that they had was, well, number 1, I was just the regular kid in the family. I was given love. I was given respect. I was given responsibilities, even if I was in a chair, and I also had consequences. I was not treated any different just because I had a disability. The second piece is involving users in decisions. And it's interesting, the family that said, I wish I would have had a wheelchair instead of a stroller. In my experience as a therapist, families fall into 1 of 2 camps. And I'm not judging either way, and it's across all disabilities, is you fall into 1 of 2 camps. Number 1, I want the umbrella stroller, the oversized umbrella stroller, because I don't want anybody to know my child has a disability. Or the other camp who says, there's no way, I want that wheelchair, because I don't want somebody thinking that my kid is just lazy. So know what you are. And it's not wrong either way. I guess the part that I put and say is involving the user in those decisions as well. Every time, and I will tell you, the oversized umbrella stroller, the McLaren stroller, oh my gosh, it's easy. It collapses, it tucks in the seat in the back. It's pretty lightweight. It fits in overhead sometimes on planes. But at the same time, it means that young person will never be able to move that device themselves. Whereas the wheelchair, there's a greater chance that they're going to get arms down there or they're going to get pushed by a friend. And the other piece is as well is it's not just about ambulation. Having the wheelchair may mean that, guess what? They can keep up with their friends at recess. They're not stuck where they are. And the other piece that, that whole idea of why do we start talking about equipment so earlier? Why is it important to make these considerations? And in the words of Neil, his comment was, because I had him as a counselor, as a young camper, and I bumped into him when at the Eaton Center the one time, and I said, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" And he finished high school, and as well, he was going to go to college. So he went to OCAD. He thought that was kind of cool. And then he graduated and he goes, "I'm still alive. What am I going to do now? I'm going to have to actually get a job." So he went back to school to become a graphic designer at Humber, which is fine. And then he finished that. And then I met him a couple of years later. I said, "So how's it going?" He goes, "I wasn't supposed to live this long. What am I going to do now?" So he said, "I got to find a job." And so again, that whole idea of, you don't know, none of us know how long we're going to live. I got to get a job. And I looked him up online recently to find out. That's how I found out he's still alive. And still, he is. He's a graphic designer. He's a consultant. I looked at some of his projects, are actually kind of cool. But that whole idea of, what do I do now? So we actually have to start planning now for the future and way into the future. When we start looking at folks that they're having shorter ambulation issues, we really, from an equipment perspective, it's kind of like dating. You can't get what you want until you know what you want. Same with equipment. Set some goals, what you're looking for. What do you need? And kind of that roadmap of, what are our short-term goals? What are our medium-term goals for the equipment? What are our long-term goals for the equipment? When we're working with children, guess what? You feed them, you water them, and they grow. Even if it's a little slower, they grow and change. What's the plan for that? Distinguishing between what are must-haves, it has to fit in through the front door of the house, versus, well, it would be kind of nice if it would fold at the push of a button and came in lime green. Everything about equipment is about compromises or being able to get what we want and make it fit your lifestyle. None of us here are wearing the same shoes. Guess what? We're picking it based on our preferences and what fits how we live our life. Equipment is no different than that. When we're starting to introduce it, we want to have some idea about what the goal for that equipment is. Having the first time getting a diagnosis doesn't mean we race out and modify the bathroom immediately, because are you going to be in that same house? On the other hand, when we're introducing in the equipment, for example, a commode or a shower chair or a bath chair, we actually want you to start thinking about not just today, but we know that Duchenne's is a progressive disability. Depending on what your medical treatment is and what the medical plan is, you may change at different rates, but we know there will be change. And my comment always to families is, plan for change. Something that's cheap and cheerful really isn't all that cheap. If you have to replace it in a year's time because you can't add laterals to it, or you can't, we can't wheel it into the bathroom into the bedroom where the lift is, and how we're going to lift them into the tub, it doesn't work. Okay, so trying to determine, what do you need now? What might be medium-term goal? What's a long-term goal? And how will that device transition over that period of time? And for the short-term ambulator, They may be fine on a flat surface, but can they make the step up into the bus? Can they go across rough surfaces? Have we introduced or placed equipment that's going to enable this person to be a child or to be a young person first and foremost and participate in the activities that we normally expect? And I always say plan for the worst day. When somebody's a full-time wheelchair user, my first thing is don't fear the technology. Technology is there to help you and to enable you. And again, that's definitely a theme that I've heard. It's don't fear the technology. There's lots of options out there. I guess the other thing is to say, introduce the technology before the user can't adapt to change. For example, with drive controls. Start to take a look and consider, is this a joystick that we're going to be able to, for example, program for a shorter throw so it doesn't take as much effort? We want to start thinking about that now before it becomes an issue. Okay, we want to start getting used to equipment or having the concept or the availability of it before it becomes an emergency. Anybody in the room want to admit that they've had a back issue? Tell you, if you don't have your hand up, you're one of the lucky, either you're one of the lucky ones or don't worry, your time is coming. So that whole idea of how are we moving somebody, think of the worst day, the day that the young person is, they got no energy left. And guess what? Your back is at its worst. How are we getting them out of bed or into the car or onto the toilet or out of the bathtub? So start exploring and thinking about mechanical lifts. Is it a floor lift? Is it a ceiling lift? Is it installed? Is it portable? And I will tell you, for ceiling lifts, that lift is the inexpensive part. The tracking is cheap. Well, relatively speaking, in our world of OTs and equipments, the tracking is the cheap part. Take advantage of it. And the minute we start looking at somebody who is going to be a full-time wheelchair user, particularly power chair, that's the kind of bam moment. Because now you can't fit that power chair in the back of it, like in the hatchback of the car. It doesn't fold. You can't lift it to get into grandma's. We're starting to have to look at home accessibility. We're having to look at transit or accessible vehicles. The other thing we also look at, and I said before about setting goals for equipment, being realistic. I love hearing about all the medical advances. I love the concept of saying we can defeat Duchenne's. We're not there yet. So it's heartbreaking to have families that say, we're not going to, no, we're not going to consider any equipment because they're going to find a cure for this. It's like, but what about today and next week and next month and maybe next year still? We have to still be realistic about where you are now and where you might be in the future. And for young adulthood, and we'll say young adulthood, but again, depending where somebody is in their lifespan. Number one, and please, I say this from the bottom of my heart, and to the young people who are in chairs that are here or are online, please replace your seating as frequently as funding will permit. In Ontario, the Assisted Devices Program pays for new seating, no questions asked, every 2 years. Okay? If you're from another province, that's your funding model. I'm not familiar with it. Here's why I say it. Just like if I would have my shoes and I wear them every day, heat, moisture, and pressure, personalize them. I could have the exact same pair of shoes put in a box, and in 2 years' time, I go to put them on. They won't feel the same. We want you actually to replace the seating while you're still able to tolerate change. They've done studies on cushions to say, how well do they work after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years? It's actually quite a funny study way they do it, and the whole butt indentator that they put on and pressure and everything else. But really, truly, the message came away with, at about 2 years, foam and gels start to take on a shape. And if you have sat or started to compensate in one particular posture over time, the cushion starts to take on that shape, and we can't change your shape then. Here's the other reason. Manufacturers change products. We have no control over that. Right? So even though you say, well, I've got the ABC cushion and I love it, and it's now 2 years, 4 years old, and I want another one, and we put it on the chair, it won't feel the same. They may have changed the model. They may have discontinued it. It will never feel the same. So I always say, stay ahead of the cushions or the products before they feel too different for you. The other thing is about being proactive instead of reactive, staying ahead and finding out what's out there. There's some pretty cool technology out there. Young men who are in the later stages or who are using a tray and joysticks and their hands get cold and can't drive their chair, we actually now have heaters that actually blow to keep hands warm on trays. Who knew? Okay. Your team doesn't know what you don't know. So remember to ask questions. Okay. You have to live with the consequences of your decisions. I don't. Your team doesn't. You do. Ask questions. Your equipment team, who may transition you from very early on way through to adulthood, way after these guys are long gone, your sales rep is still your sales rep and may have lived with you through all of those transitions. Ask. They are the experts on the equipment. Ask the pros and cons, because I said, you have to live with the decisions. And there's new products coming on the market all the time. And the last slide, show me the money. I listed them here. Again, we're in Ontario, or I'm practiced primarily in Ontario. And I actually kind of put it sort of as the most common hierarchy of funding equipment. And I'm a taxpayer, so I'm going to tell you first and foremost, access your government funding programs, your provincial funding programs, wherever you are. In Ontario, it's the Assistive Devices Program. Every province has a provincial funding program for mobility equipment. The next one is looking at social assistance. We mentioned that about assistance to children with severe disabilities or Ontario Disability Support Program when somebody is 18. And those one, the second one is definitely a needs-based or an income-based qualification. The third one down is private insurance. If you have insurance for your workplace, for heaven's sakes, you're paying for that benefit. Take advantage of it, but know what they fund and what they don't fund and what are the limitations. So you kind of can get the most out of it. The next 4 are donation-based. Muscular Dystrophy Association of Canada, Easter Seals, March of Dimes, and service clubs. I encourage families to make sure that you get registered for the organizations that they have any access to. Register early, so when you actually need equipment, you may be able to apply for it and be able to access that funding, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I have to get all these papers together to see if I even qualify to be able to register with them. So get registered early so you can get help when you need it and you're not delayed. But just remember, all of those ones, including the service clubs, are donation-based. So I put them lower down. We want to access the other areas first. And the last one actually is also private pay. And I will tell you, in most cases, with the donation-based ones, they generally don't pay 100%. They'll pay a small portion, and you're kind of having to go a little bit from one place and a little bit from another place and a little bit. So you kind of become this orchestra director to try and figure out how you're going to cobble it together. But at least you have a chance to be able to pull from multiple pots. And I said the last one is private pay. I'm amazed who has paid for equipment. One young man that I work with, he really wanted the seat elevator, not the stander, this which we have over there, but a seat elevator. Why? Because, you know, he goes to hockey games and he wants to actually be able to see over the boards and watch everything that's going on. But it's not funded by the provincial government. But guess what? His best friend owns a bar. And when we say, he says, just tell me how much it is. My buddy said he might be able to, pay for a few things if I need it. And we go, well, here's the price. He goes, well, I don't know. I'll ask him. Boy, that was one night's take, paid for, done. After 5-6 years, the chair had finally lived its last legs. And we go, how's your buddy's bar doing? I am amazed where money comes from. Another family has said, you know something? She says, they're in a small town, and she goes, I end up, I see, the service clubs and all the people, at the grocery store, because I live in a small town. She goes, they came to me and said, hey, we haven't heard from you for a while. Don't you need something? We got some money. Come on. So again, reaching out to the unusual sources as well. That's my words of wisdom for transitions and equipment. We actually are over at the side. Motion is a company that has locations on Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. We're not on the East Coast. I don't know if that's good or bad. Colin's shaking his head back there. But definitely we do share knowledge. We do have lots of knowledge within our company, and we have access to lots of products. And again, we're always getting asked for stuff that's kind of cool. And I'm excited about what manufacturers are bringing to the plate. I also belong to an international registry of rehab technology suppliers, and trying to raise the standard of vendors, because not all vendors are created equal. I'll be honest about that. But just trying to raise that standard, that people are invested in ensuring that okay, so we have to make money to stay in business, but the person at the center is you, and making sure that you're asking the questions and that you become an informed consumer, and that the young person is the consumer, because guess what? Who knew they were going to live that long, and that they're going to make the decisions in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one question online before we get to any in the room. This is from Mark. Can bracing help even in someone with Duchenne who is non-ambulatory?
So the short answer is yes. The issue is more, what is your goal for the brace? And I always ask myself when I'm having discussions, and I ask the family to put their thinking hat on, is a goal what we call passive? Is it active, or is it symptom? So in some individuals, it's a passive goal. So what you're trying to do is maintain range of motion, and you're trying to help with seating, positioning, those types of goals. And wearing cool shoes, because it's hard to get cool shoes if your feet aren't fitting into the cool shoes. Good answer. And then there's a symptom goal that I often think about, because sometimes when feet get into unusual positions and you're sitting in your chair or wherever you're sitting, your feet are not comfortable. And we talked about the importance of avoiding pain to optimize quality of life. So what we want maybe from a brace is more a passive or a symptom goal, and not the active goal that other people are using the brace for.
Thank you.
Good.
I don't think there's any other questions in the room.
Is there anyone that has a question? Just give me a wave and I'll bring you the.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things that Dr. Alazem and I are working on, which we think is quite exciting, is technology to enable children, or we call it tech. And I know that vendors and individuals that work in this field will be excited about that. We know technology starts big and clunky and then gets smaller and smaller. But we would be really excited, and we're hoping, I don't know, at Children's Hospital Eastern Ontario, we're building a building that's called One Door for Care, that's going to be a marriage of rehabilitation and mental health. And I think there's some discussions about mental health later today. But really to have a place where you can come to talk about best match. So, and to try different things and to have a match technology. Some of the cool things we're working on now are robotics. So we've started working with robotic walkers. We're looking at robotic arms. I know there's a Canadian device, which is a robotic arm. We've just put in fact, Monday, we're putting in a protocol to look at brain to computer interface. So if you can't physically do something, and now there are available devices. So the sky is really the limits with some of this technology. But we need to work together, families and therapists and people who make the devices and physicians to look at what's the best match. And not only that, we know the technology is out there. Let's close the gap between when it starts and putting it in the hands of the people who can most benefit. Let's learn for every device that's been put out there, have it actively involved in a study and make it better and better and make it more accessible and less expensive. So that's something that we're working on that I would like to share with you.
All right, I think it's time to wrap up this session. If nobody has any burning questions, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Great, thank you very much. Awesome, thank you very much. What a great morning. Let's give a round of applause for all the speakers, please. So I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'll keep it brief, but a couple of things. Remember, we have our contests. So we have our selfie wall over here where you can take pictures. We have our Whova app. I was on there this morning actually looking at the Whova app, and we have 86 people or so online attending. You can message people online that you know and have online conversations, which is very, very cool. One thing I wanted to share, I might have gone over it this morning. I think I missed it, but just hot off the press for today, we've announced a collaboration research award of $300,000 US in partnership with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, PPMD in the US, to support 2 clinical fellowships in Duchenne endocrinology and bone fragility, which really aligns to what we talked about this morning. The 3-year award will sponsor the extended fellowship of Dr. Kim Fung, who you heard from this morning, and as well as the new fellow, Dr. Rana Hulan, under the guidance of Dr. Leanne Ward. This fellowship grant and all of our research grant funding is only made possible by generous donors. So thank you for your continuous support, and that's great news. So hot off the press. So congratulations on that new research funding.